Hello everyone, this is Pablo again with Meditation Amsterdam, and I'm back for what is likely to be the last video on the book The Foundations of Mindfulness by Eric Harrison. In the past videos we've gone through the basic definition of mindfulness according to Buddhism, and we have covered 3 of the 4 foundations of mindfulness according to the Satipatthana Sutta, the scriptures by the Buddha that refer to how to cultivate mindfulness. So Harrison again provides a translation of the 4 foundations of mindfulness, and we've covered the first 3 of them. And so just to recap, we talked about mindfulness of the body or kaya, mindfulness of emotion or vedana, mindfulness of states of mind or chitta, and finally we're going to cover mindfulness of thought, which is called Dhamma. And so as per previous videos, I'm going to dive straight into the text. I'm going to read it out to you and then do a little bit of commentary to explain what this all means. So it goes like this. How does a monk live fully conscious and in control of his thoughts? He contemplates the 5 aggregate parts that make up his sense of self. He understands how the body, perceptions, feelings, action tendencies, and consciousness arise and pass away. He investigates how attachment occurs through the contact of sense organs and sense objects, and understands how to break free from that attachment. The monk reflects on the 4 noble truths that lead to Nirvana. He understands by direct experience that life is suffering. The cause of suffering is desire. Desire can be extinguished. The 8-fold path of training extinguishes desire and leads to the end of suffering. Anyone who practices these 4 foundations of mindfulness for 7 years or 7 months or even 7 days may experience one of 2 outcomes: complete enlightenment in this life, or, if some trace of clinging to the world still remains, no rebirth after death. The systematic 4-stage training of attention is the only way to overcome suffering, to purify the mind, to enter the true path, and attain enlightenment. And so, so that last part there is, you could claim that's a little bit dogmatic. I mean, it was the Buddha after all, so you can't blame the guy for being all into Buddhism. But in all seriousness, so this mindfulness of thought is when things get a little bit more subtle than all the previous ones. So once again, this is something that we emphasize in the 3rd foundation, which was mindfulness of state of mind. The progressive path of mindfulness on the way to enlightenment is one in which we start to become mindful of things in our periphery that are very easy to perceive. And as we progress in the path, we start to progressively become more mindful of things in the periphery that are not only more subtle, but also closer to what we consider to be ourselves. So think of it this way. When we have no mindfulness, we are mostly living in our periphery. In other words, our state of mind and our attention is consistently hijacked by things happening around us, all right? And so the very first step that the Buddha proposes is to say, look, start becoming mindful of your body. Because the moment you do that, you achieve 2 things. The first is you stop allowing your senses to be always hijacked. And by that I mean sight and mostly sight and hearing. Sight is probably the biggest way to hijack your mindfulness, because you get lost in the things that you're seeing around you. So by bringing your senses into the body, you're bringing them closer to your focus, or rather to your source of consciousness, if you will. And so you start to observe your body. And so again, you achieve 2 things. One of them is you took your awareness out of that periphery out there and you bring it to the one that is closer to you. But the other one is you've already started to subtly disidentify with your body, because if you can't be something that you can observe, right? So as long as you can describe something, it isn't you, because the thing that you are is the thing doing the describing, is the thing doing the observing and the naming and so on. So you start to retract to the center further and further, right? So the first thing is you observe your body, easy to observe, but still in the periphery. And the next one is mindfulness of emotions, right? So now you're observing sensations in the body that are pleasant and unpleasant based on emotional states. Then you retract even further into mindfulness of states of mind, meaning, am I angry? Do I feel desire? Do I feel this or that? And the final one is mindfulness of thought, and that one is super, super hard, because so just as sight is the easiest way to get hijacked or lose mindfulness with things in the outer world, if you will, thought is the easiest way to lose your mindfulness in the inner world. So your inner world can be hijacked, of course, by emotion, and that's also it's a very easy way to lose your mindfulness. But emotion is at least easy to identify. I mean, at least you are very much, especially with unpleasant emotion, you are very much aware of, like, yeah, I'm feeling this and I don't like it. But with thought, they're like little bubbles that pop out of nowhere in the back of your head, and next thing you know, you've gone down this rabbit hole of thinking, whether it's positive or negative, but you've been doing it for half an hour, and by the time you come to your senses, if you will, or you become mindful again, time has gone by, and you don't know where you were, and you don't know how you got there. So thought is super subtle, and your mind gets pulled into it very easily. And so it's no coincidence that mindfulness of thought is suggested as the very last step. So if you look at the last statement, it says the systematic 4-stage training of attention is the only way to overcome suffering. I'm not too hung up on that only way statement. I'm more emphasizing the systematic 4-stage training bit. So it is systematic, and it consists of stages. You don't jump into trying to exercise mindfulness of thought dead cold without ever having exercised mindfulness of body, because chances are you don't even know what it is that you're looking for, and your thought is going to hijack you, and you're not going to be the wiser, right? So it is a systematic step-by-step approach that is being provided here. And so again, right, this other part that is important is, it says he investigates how attachment occurs through the contact of sense organs and sense objects, right? So you have these organs that are there to help you navigate in the world. But these organs they're sort of super hungry for stimulus. So they're always perceiving things out there. And what tends to happen is something catches your attention, and your senses drag you into it, and you are completely gone into that sensory perception. So you, in a sense, relinquish your sense of self and give it away to things outside of you, because your senses pull you out. And they're constantly pulling you out, constantly pulling you out. Now, it is not necessarily an evil thing, right? So people who were completely enmeshed in their own inner environment probably didn't make it in the Darwinian selection process, because if a lion is nearby, you want your senses to perceive it. So senses are constantly going out there, pinging off of the environment to see is there danger in the environment, and especially in the sense of human beings, you are also constantly pinging to try and determine what your social status is within a given environment, and then your posture adapts to that, and so on. But what tends to happen again is that you become identified with what you're seeing out there, and you also become identified with your reaction to it. And that identification then becomes the source for what the Buddha calls attachment. And attachment is a two-pronged thing. So you are attached to receiving more validation and getting more pleasurable experiences and emotions, and you are equally attached to avoiding unpleasant emotions and pain and embarrassment and all those kind of things that you just, well, you don't want to have that, right? So you're attached and you have preference for those scenarios, but the problem becomes it's more like you get the input, the emotion flares up, whether good or bad, and based on that you decide that you want more. So now you've become attached, whereas you can't do much about the input. It comes in. Maybe you can't even do much about your reaction either, although there are ways to sort of dampen your response to outside stimuli. In other words, to be more inward to out driven. But perhaps let's say that you're not that advanced and there's a reaction and you're some kind of emotional reaction. What an advanced meditation practitioner or a sort of very mindful person will do is they will observe that reaction, they'll let it run its course, and then it's done. Whereas if you don't have that, you're going to attach to that reaction. And if it's unpleasant, you're going to attach to the idea that it shouldn't be happening and you want to let it go. And if it's pleasant, you're going to attach to the idea that you need to retain it as long as possible. And both those things create this tension and this contraction within you, in which you have confused yourself with the stimulus and the emotional response to it, and you have lost your sense of self. So in a sense, you have lost your free will. You are now in machine world, so to speak. You're a robot that is responding based on a pre-programmed response that is in your psyche, whether it is because of the way you were raised or previous experiences or just your emotional makeup. And so what this entire path is about is to deprogram yourself from that cycle of stimulus response. And the more mindful you become and the more you exercise the 4 foundations of mindfulness, which is, again, body, emotions, states of mind, and thought, the more you become self-driven and driven from your center outwards, as opposed to being constantly on reaction mode. So think of it in this way. So when you don't have mindfulness, you're almost like the apprentice tennis player who's got this super high-speed ball launching machine in front of you, and all you have the chance to do is respond, because things are coming at you at 1,000 miles an hour, and you're just trying to not get hit. But when you start to develop mindfulness, you suddenly become like this pro athlete who's serving, and you got this very cool serve going on. So you're no longer in reaction, but you can respond, but you can also have agency in the world. In other words, you are now an initiator of action, and you get to choose what you want to do, right? And you get to choose it in spite of negative or positive emotions that could be affecting you. And so let's take into a couple of scenarios where that becomes more clear. So suppose that you are very self-conscious about I don't know, something about your physical appearance or the fact that you have a stutter or some sort of thing. And so suddenly you are in a situation that gets brought up or it gets highlighted, and now you feel very self-conscious. So your state of mind is affected, and you become less effective throughout the rest of the day, right? So maybe it was a small comment or something that reminded you of a negative experience, and now your state goes down. But because you have no mindfulness, you not only allow your state to take a little dip, but you go into a downward spiral of negative emotions and negative thoughts, and you have no way to stop that. So it's a downward spiral, and so it affects you for a relatively long time. And maybe even the opposite scenario. I mean, it is well known that casinos give you free food, and they even give you free luxury suites and things like that. And not suites as in, to eat, but as in like a hotel room, luxury hotel room, so that you start to suddenly feel very elated, and you think you're like this high roller who can spend a couple of thousand and or 10,000 or whatever it is, because they make you feel in a certain elation, and you buy into it, and suddenly you start making decisions that are detrimental in the long term for you. In other words, you didn't know how to temper your actions and make them let's say take healthy actions despite of the high emotions that you're experiencing at that moment. And so what happens when you start to develop mindfulness is you are able to observe emotions and still have enough space and enough, I would say, clarity of mind to observe the emotion and say, well, that's all good and great, but I'm still going to do X, right? I'm still going to go in a different direction. So it is much more difficult to have you coerced into making decisions you don't really want because you're being manipulated or guilt tripped, for example, into saying, well, you know, I guess we've done all of this now, so I can't say no anymore, or you know, people are going to think of this and that or whatever. It's like you are much more at ease with discomfort because you realize that discomfort is just some sensation in the body which you can observe. And if we go back to a book that we reviewed in the past, which was Mindsight by Daniel Siegel, you'll remember that or you might remember that he mentioned that one of the biggest indicators or traits of the healthy mind, the mind that is becoming integrated and it is becoming a system in flow, is that it doesn't shy away from challenge, but it is actually going out there and actively seeking challenging situations to grow, because it feels like it's on a very stable mode, but it also knows implicitly that even if a challenge comes which makes you feel uncomfortable, you have the resilience and the tools in your arsenal to overcome that discomfort and just state what you want, or pursue things that might bring you discomfort in the short term in order to gain a better situation in the long run. So it's a very, very powerful state of affairs that you want to try and cultivate. And one of the beauties of it is that it is a state of affairs that arises not through power and pushing and tension and willpower, which are all very short-lived, very stressful, very contracting, forceful actions, but it's power that comes from stillness, which is the opposite. I am starting to read some literature on alchemy and Taoist Neigong, which is a very beautiful internal practice. And one of the things that the Taoists explored very deeply and discovered was that at the extreme of a certain type of attitude, once you've reached the limit towards a certain side of things, the opposite arises in a very strong way. And so what that means is that if you burn yourself out through sheer willpower and action, there's a chance that you're going to collapse. So out of the ultimate yang, yin arises. The same goes for the opposite. If what you do instead of pushing and forcing is you cultivate ultimate stillness and acceptance and ultimate humility, you are standing on such a solid platform that growth from there is very, very easy, and it's effortless. You don't have to push, you don't have to use willpower. It comes of its own accord, and it's a very beautiful thing to see grow in yourself. So it's one of the reasons that I love to share these kind of videos and this content. So with that said, I think I'm going to call it a video. I'll try to scout around for some additional quotes in this book, because there's some value still to be squeezed, I think, but in essence this covers it, because this is really the translation from the text of the Buddha. It is, if after all is said and done and we think of all kinds of different angles to explore about this topic of meditation, mindfulness, how to grow, how to cultivate yourself, the practice outlined in the 4 foundations of mindfulness, this is it, right? At least when it comes to mental development, there's something to be said about cultivation of the body, of course. There's something to be said about cultivation of knowledge. There's something to be said about cultivation of your attitudes, especially towards others, and the action that you can take in that regard. But when it comes to developing the big base of the foundation of mindfulness, which is the platform upon which you build a lot of these things, well, essentially this is it, right? So all there is to discuss when it comes to mindfulness beyond this is what are good tactics to get you into a practice that is sustainable? What are good tactics that get you into a practice that is effective and efficient for you and that matches your lifestyle and things of this kind? And what are even good tactics to get you to begin practicing mindfulness if you are a total beginner who because unless you have experienced some of these moments and some of these benefits, you almost have to take it on faith, or you almost have to take a plunge into like, okay, I guess I'm going to sit 5 or 10 minutes a day, close my eyes and, try something out. But I really don't know what I'm doing, and I really don't know why I'm doing it, other than the fact that, there's discomfort in my life and I want it to go away. Right. So that was it. So that's the Foundations of Mindfulness by Eric Harrison. Hope you enjoyed this clip, and I'll come back soon with a new book. Cheers.